ranking the Fab Four right now: Sugar Ray Leonard, Thomas Hearns, Roberto Duran, and Marvin Hagler. For me, going from best to worst, I got to go with Sugar Ray Leonard one. I think from a skill standpoint, he was the best. And from a resume standpoint, he beat the other three guys. No one else on that list can say that they beat the other three people. Leonard won at 147, dominated the welterweight division, did lose to Roberto Duran, but came back and made him quit in the rematch, beat Benitez. And he beat a lot of good welterweights: Andy Price, Floyd Mayweather, Ranzani, Dave Green. You know, he had a good share of wins, you know, over there. You know, and then knocked out Thomas Hearns, one of the best fights in boxing history when Hearns was undefeated. Beat Kiule at 154. And then he goes on and beats Hagler at middleweight. It's like, dude, this guy beat Hearns. When he beat Duran was number one in the pound for pound list. When he beat Hearns was number one in the pound for pound list. And when he beat Hagler was number one in the pound for pound list. So that's just crazy also that all four of these guys were number one in the pound for pound list at one point, and they all fought each other. That's why people always talk about the 80s Fab Four as the golden era of you know, they were all at the same, like, you know, time and same weight class. And they did a great documentary on Showtime about that. Check that out if you haven't. But I would go with number two, Roberto Duran. Duran, probably the greatest lightweight of all time, certainly in that conversation. I think he was like 71-1 before he fought Leonard. Moved up, beat Leonard after Leonard had beat Benitez, legitimately beat Leonard. And, you know, that's one of the most incredible victories in the history of boxing, if not the best victory in the history of boxing, of all weight classes. Then he goes in the rematch. This is where it gets a little bit negative. He quits in the rematch, you know, after not doing so well. That did show a little bit of mental weakness. He goes back home. They want to stone him. Ray Arcel says, I'm not training such a guy like this. He's embarrassed. Comes back, loses to a journeyman, Kirkland Lane. Comes back, loses to Wilfredo Benitez, and it wasn't even competitive. But I think actually the Benitez fight was first. But then he fights Davey Moore at 154. And Davey Moore was a young prospect on the way up. And people thought Duran was an old champion who was faded. And they're like, you know what, we're going to pick that fight. Davey Moore's handler's like, we're going to pick that fight with Duran. He's going to beat Duran. And we're going to we're gonna pick that fight, and we're gonna, you know, beat this guy, and we're gonna make a name off of beating a former great champion. And boy, did they make a mistake, because Roberto Duran destroyed Davey Moore in that fight. Was not close, knocked him out, got the 54-pound title. Then he fights Hagler at 160. It was you know, competitive fight and very impressive, valiant effort for a guy who's a much smaller man to fight a great middleweight like Marvin Hagler and, you know, do well. And I think after 12 rounds, he was ahead, but I could be wrong on that. But I know Hagler won the decision. Then he goes down to 54, gets knocked out by Hearns. But he comes back years later and beats Iron Barkley, who knocked out Thomas Hearns before that. So that just shows you how great he was. To win at all those weight classes, dude was a monster. 3 for me is Tommy Hearns, boxing's first ever 5-division champion. Knocked out Pino Cuevas, had the Kronk style, the style that Emmanuel Stewart used with Thomas Hearns, Lennox Lewis, and Vladimir Klitschko, and now Javon Sugar Hill Stewart uses with Tyson Fury. Hearns was a monster, one of the great welterweights of all time. Had one of the great fights with Leonard, where he won most of the rounds in the fight, but Leonard was able to stop him late in the fight. Hearns is a monster, you know, no doubt about it. First man to knock out Duran. And he won at 160. He beat Rodon. Maybe you could say that was like more of a paper champ. And 168, I believe he won a world title at. And he ends up beating Virgil Hill, who was a very good light heavyweight, at light heavyweight. So Hearns was legitimately the light heavyweight champion. He was a legit 5-division champion, boxing's first ever 5-division champion. That's pretty impressive. The big knock on Hearns, though, for me is that in the 2 biggest fights of his career versus Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler, he got knocked out in both of them. So I have to, you know, look at that a little bit. And he didn't really have the versatility, I think, of a Leonard or a Duran or a Hagler, where he was more, this is my style and that's it. And a lot of people thought he beat Leonard in that last fight, and Leonard himself even admitted that he really beat him. So that's pretty cool of Sugar Ray Leonard to admit that. But for me, Hearns is number 3. From the waist down, I think, you know, I can't even say waist down, from the waist to the neck, he might have been the best boxer in history. He probably has the best jab in history, and that great right hand, threw good hooks, controlled range so well. His footwork, I don't think, was like, up to par with like Leonard's or someone like that. And I don't think his ring IQ was, at that level. And, I know a lot of people, they bring up how, his chin wasn't the greatest, but I think it was more of a conditioning thing with him more than anything else. And he didn't seem to take body punches so well. His legs weren't the strongest, but man, was he such a great fighter. One of the great fighters in history. And for me, number 4 is Marvin Hagler. And a lot of people are going to say, how do you have Hagler 4? Hagler was amazing, but he only won in one weight class, unlike those other guys. And his big wins were against smaller men moving up. And for him to struggle versus Leonard, Duran, and other fights in his career where he didn't look as dominant, when these guys are the guys coming up in weight class and you're losing to them or not dominating them, is a little alarming to me. He lost during his career, Willie Monroe, not a great fighter. And I think with Hagler, he could switch hit, but he was much better from the, southpaw stance. He was iron chin, great work rate, very good counter puncher, physically strong, cutting off the ring. But I didn't think his defense or footwork was, anything really special. It was at best adequate, wasn't very good. And he could be outboxed. And even on the inside, I thought Leonard was and Duran were giving it to him. So I think that Hagler was great, but out of those 4, I got to rank him 4th. This is not in a head-to-head sense. This is in a pound-for-pound sense. So I want to make that clear. In a head-to-head sense, yeah, you probably would have to say Hagler's 1 because he beat Duran. I mean, no, you'd have to say Leonard's 1 because he beat all those other guys. But, yeah, let me know what you guys think. If it's on a pound-for-pound sense, it's Leonard, Duran, Hearns, Hagler. If it's on a head-to-head sense, it's Leonard, Hagler, probably Hearns, and then Duran. Please let me know what you guys think. Please like, share, comment, subscribe. Peace.